For the record, and then we can get started.
Yeah, okay. I'm Heather Darby. I am an agronomist and soil specialist with the University of Vermont Extension.
Heather, can you turn up your volume a little bit, or maybe we can do that here?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know how to turn up my volume.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm not gonna ask you to
It's all
shout,
the
but,
way up.
okay. All
I
right, we
just,
can hear you.
okay. All right. Well, I was asked to talk a little bit about, what it means to be prime agricultural soil or land. Um, and of course, that terminology, definition, classifications, those have been designated primarily through the USDA, through the US government, nationally, right? So across our nation, someone, people with lots of what I would say foresight and for very good reason, decided that we should identify lands in this country that are prime for agricultural production, right? So I can imagine this was from a national security perspective, really being able to figure out where in our country are the soils that are best utilized for producing food to feed people, um, forage, fiber, and oil seed. All of those, right, being used to feed the people of the United States and clothe them, right? And also now, living in a more global economy, clearly agriculture in the US may be feeding folks elsewhere as well. But, of utmost importance, clearly, is the ability for a country to feed and clothe and house its people, right? So knowing that we have land that can do that is at the core of national security. So the definition, it's not just a definition on paper, right? There are characteristics of soil that would make it more or less ideal for producing agricultural products. Um, and, you can kind of imagine soils that may not be ideal for agricultural production or food production, soils that are maybe very steeply sloped or very, very rocky, or also very, very wet and may serve other critical functions like wetlands, as an example, to protecting the people and the land in the country. Okay, so prime ag land, again, it's beyond just a definition on paper. It's really characterizing those soils that are best used to feed the people in our country. Now, again, that's for every state across the nation. Those soils have been identified and characterized, and the characteristics agreed upon through the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, right? And then within that national definition, there are also soils of state and local importance. And you can see here on the bottom, I say that the national definition of prime land was modified to include information that applies to soils in Vermont and, obviously states other than Vermont too. But those are characteristics that are associated to kind of the amount of soil available to grow a crop. So moderate deep depth to bedrock. As you know, we have a lot of what would be considered elsewhere shallow soils. And so prime ag land definition now includes some of the soils that are moderately deep, not just those that are very, very deep. Okay. Again, this classification is through the US government, through NRCS, and you can, all this information is available to you in different forms. You can see those soils mapped, they're in surveys, they're online. So you can see what's been considered prime farmland. And again, within a state, there's also farmland of statewide and then also of local importance. And those are identified by NRCS, UVM, likely the Agency of Ag as well, and you'll hear more about that within our state, right? So they may not necessarily exactly meet the definition, the federal definition of prime farmland, but within our state, these are considered our prime farmlands. So they're of statewide agricultural importance. And then in some cases, down to the more very local level by the county of importance. Now, you may have this document, you may not, you may have seen it, but this is specific to Vermont. This is available online. It's available on the Act 250 website. It's available through the Agency of Ag. So if you don't have it, it's actually a really good read. It talks about the classification of farmland in the state of Vermont. And again, this is a document through NRCS, but contributions clearly made from statewide organizations as well. So again, I would recommend to you having this document handy. I'm sure you've seen it before, and I'm happy to send it to you. Yeah. Oh, okay. Now, if you really want to get into it and dig around for your own county or area that you represent, it's somewhat easy to do. It looks easy, press this button, but you can go to the web soil survey online. You can dial right down to your town. You can kind of zoom into even the little parcel that you live on, and you can see the soil type and description and characteristics of soils all over Vermont and actually all over the country as well. And you can see them classified as prime ag land or statewide importance, like I said, or local importance as well. So it's easy to find. Once you get into the soil survey, you got to kind of get acquainted with it before you can start getting information. But these maps are also widely available online, and I'm sure if you wanted to see them, if you requested these from the Agency of Ag, you would be able to get them. Okay, so what are the characteristics of prime ag land? And again, I think you can imagine the types of soils that would grow good crops, good food, and feed and fiber. They generally are those that have high soil quality by nature, right? So, and I say that meaning that as a farmer, you can manage soils to improve soil quality by implementing various practices, but some soils also just have the inherent, properties of better soil quality. So that would mean that they're higher in organic matter. Naturally, they have kind of a diverse mix, I would say, of soil textures, right? So it's not all clay or it's not all sand. It's a mix. We call those loams, loamy soils. They have good drainage. They are deep. There's lots of soil for the crop or food to grow and explore. They're minerally rich, right? So they have lots of nutrition, and not too rocky, which is hard to find in places like Vermont. So that's why we have soils of statewide importance. Topography is important. Usually prime agricultural lands are flat or gently sloping. And of course, again, in Vermont, we tend to have a hilly landscape with some valleys. So again, why we have ag soils of statewide importance, not just of the federal definition.
Heather, do you mind if we ask a question now and
No,
then? All
no,
right,
please do.
Representative O'Brien?
Oh, just quickly, Heather, under physical properties, it says low comma erodibility.
Oh, yeah, sorry. It's meant, that's an extra comma there. But
Okay.
it's supposed to be
I was wondering if
low.
it meant
As-
altitude.
Yeah, getting busy with my commas, too busy. Low erodibility, right?
Got it.
So you would have both a slope likely that was a lower slope, not as much slope, and soil particles that are not as prone to erosion. So,
Representative
you know-
Nelson's got a question too.
Yep.
but-
Two comments on topography, Heather. Flooding, Winooski River Valley.
Yep.
I consider that some of the best ag land we have in the state of Vermont, although it floods from time to time. Would that make it not prime, but of local importance?
correct. So, if a soil is defined as having frequent flooding, which I believe is, and I think I have it in here, more than 2 years in a row on average, it is not considered prime agricultural land. It would be considered likely of state agricultural importance.
So thinking of, again, Winooski River Valley, it did flood 2 years in a row. That's not on average, but it does tend to flood springtime.
Yep.
Would that preclude it from being a prime ag soil?
It could, yep.
All right,
Especially
and
if it was every year.
And the next thing on slope. There's some really, really, really good soils growing
Yep.
sod crops.
Yep.
Because of slope. Would that preclude them from being prime ag?
Yes,
Or
Yep.
could they be prime ag because of the crop they grow?
no, it's really about the soil characteristics themselves.
Okay,
So it probably would not be considered prime agricultural land by the federal definition, but they could be designated as statewide, prime ag lands.
okay, thank you, because this isn't Iowa.
Right.
Representative
so-
O'Brien, one
Yep.
other question.
Yeah, just quickly, Heather. So if Vermont wanted to build a series of levees in the Winooski, could those soils be transformed into prime ag soils?
They could probably be reclassified at some point. Yep.
Okay.
Is that a
So-
periodic thing?
The
Must be
NRCS
consulted.
does constantly survey, right? So the maps and the map units, all of these things get, I would say they have gotten better at finer details. So think about how difficult it is to map the soils of Vermont. If you own land or you're a farmer, You can walk sometimes 50 feet in a field and have it a completely different soil type. And if and this is how it's primarily been done, right? People go to the fields. They core the fields. They assess the fields. And so, dialing down to exactly what's there, we've gotten better at that, but that also takes time, resources. There's new technology now that can be used, but this is like an ongoing, always work in progress. I mean, we just got a call maybe 2 or 3 years ago on my own farm asking NRCS asking if they can come out and do soil surveying. So those maps do get updated. As far as reclassifying those soils, now you have to remember, like let's say it like a Missisquoi sandy loam or something like that can be found in different spots, right? So just because one area has been modified to make it more conducive for agriculture, it doesn't mean the rest of the that particular soil type that's represented elsewhere in the state has undergone that same modification. So it would be very difficult, right? You could see where things would shift majorly in a classification scheme. Okay. You could reach out to NRCS if you wanted kind of their, I guess, quote unquote, schedule on going out and surveying. But if you looked at a survey map, I have some in my office from the Grand Isle County from 1945. And then you look today, I bet you would see things have shifted and become more defined over time. So these are more specifics around soil characteristics. So you can see the soils are not frequently flooded, less often than once in 2 years during the growing season. So the question you were asking before, Richard, about, well, if they're commonly flooded maybe in the winter or early spring, but not during the growing season per se, they could be classified as prime. You can see slopes of less than 8%. And we have a lot over 8% in Vermont that are farmed with, like Richard said, perennial forages, but they're probably not considered prime ag land on the federal designation level. So you can see there's pretty specific characteristics here. Now the bottom one is what has been modified. So the soils are typically deep, greater than 40 inches to bedrock. And I'm chuckling a little bit because we have some of those in Vermont, but we have a lot that aren't. And so then it was added, but include moderately deep soils, 20 to 40 inches. Okay. So we have more moderately deep soils in Vermont than we have deep. Deep soils are those found generally, I would say, in the Midwest, places like Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. So there are very specific characteristics, those listed here. I believe these are most of them. I got these from NRCS. And there's details within this, obviously, as well, like what is a growing season, right? That's going to change from place to place, state to state, region to region. So, but
A follow-up. Yeah, another question.
Heather, just to follow up, does NRCS ever reclassify depending on, say, like in Vermont, as you've led this, through agronomic practices, the soil improves so much that
no,
NRCS says, oh, this is now prime soil because we've got an extra 6 inches of topsoil?
no.
Oh.
Nope. Nope, because we have to think about, I mean, clearly management is, plays a huge role in how productive a soil is, regardless of how prime it is, right? Prime soil is more forgiving, right? And it's easier to farm. It's easier to grow things. When you get outside of prime, you got to do a little more work. It's harder. It's harder to maintain the quality of the soil. It's harder to grow crops. You have to pay more attention to how you as a manager manage that soil. As a farmer, myself, but in general, it's difficult to farm in Vermont. We have difficult soils. And we have to, manage them differently, and farmers do, to have them be productive, and also protect them from environmental forces, basically. And those forces are, rain, and the climate. So just because a farmer is doing an excellent job and is maybe getting yields and productivity equal or greater than what someone on prime ag land is getting, it doesn't reclassify it. But it is something to be proud of. But yeah, that's not how it works. And again, we're looking at these of national importance, right? Think about this from a national security perspective, and our ability as a nation to feed ourselves. Now again, most people, what they have on their tables often does not resemble anything that has come out of a field, right? Like a chicken nugget or there's a lot of processed food, a Frito or whatever, doesn't look like a piece of corn or, a chicken drum or thigh. So, there's really this lack of, I think, connection to why in the world would we be worried about this or thinking about this, or why did anybody think about this to begin with? Right? Because we are largely disconnected to what it means to eat, or maybe what it means to not be able to eat. And again, largely the convenience and abundance, and of course not for everyone, of food that we have, makes us further removed from the importance of what it means to have agricultural lands in a nation and protecting those, right? And then within a state, thinking about our own people. We are here for the people of the state of Vermont, to keep them safe, right? To clothe them, to feed them, to make sure the people of our state have what they need to be successful. And at the core of it, right, it's our ability to feed, clothe, etc., have a clean environment. And so that's why within Vermont, again, we never think of this. It's so critical to know that we can take care of ourselves. And part of that is eating, right? So these are really, really important designations, and why we're adamant about protecting these lands.
Got a
And
couple
the
of
ones we have, make them as good as possible.
a couple of hands, Heather, in response or reaction to those very profound thoughts. Representative Lipsky.
Thank you, Heather. My first question has to do with, and I'm not stigmatizing Addison County, but they're sort of famous for blue or gray clay soils. How does clay?
Yeah.
It's non-organic, really, not loamy. How does that figure into these
Yeah,
uh,
yep.
stratums of,
I'm gonna show
Alright.
you. I'm gonna show you. So there are other designations, right? I told you there's state, there's prime, there's unique farmland. We don't have any of those designations in Vermont, but they do exist in some states. So unique farmland. It's usually specific to maybe a high value food or fiber crop. We don't have any of those soil types designated in Vermont specifically. We do have statewide importance, and again, this is a lot of words here. These are identified through the passage of Act 250. And then we have, I'm going to go to local importance. And those are identified obviously on a local level, and that's where some of the Addison County clays come into play. Or in Franklin County or other counties where these lighter textured soils or maybe gravelly or sandy or clay soils come into play. They're extremely important to agricultural production on a local level. And there's more of these. I just listed a few. So you can see here, some of these have higher slopes. Some of these have what would not be considered sort of the best mixture of textures, like the Missisquoi loamy sand is really like a beach sand. It doesn't have a lot of organic matter in it, but it's very important to farmers in Franklin County. So there are soils of local importance that are designated for sure.
well, I really thank you for that.
Yes.
The notion of a matter of national security really strikes a chord with me. I remember in the 1960s, there was a book called Limits to Growth, and it was talking about a global perspective, and arable land was one of the key components for in that study. And I'm glad to see that the state of Vermont, the USDA, considered food production to be so critical.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Heather,
Yeah, I think if you think about just in let's say more recent times, this is becoming the importance of this is continuing to elevate as we see events, I guess, like COVID, right, where we started to see some real holes in the food system in the United States and beyond. And what did that mean to people as they started to not see food on store shelves? Where did they turn? They turned to their neighbor, right? They turned to the person next to them growing food. And, I think it was maybe the first time in a very, very long time, maybe since the 60s, that all of a sudden people started to recognize that maybe the food wasn't always going to be there on the store shelf. And if it wasn't, where would it come from? And so, unfortunately, it's funny how fast we forget like something like that. But really, that was a important moment in time where people were turning to their neighbors that could grow food, that were growing food, and had to go to them to get the food that they needed. Very, very different than how we normally operate. But again, really puts perspective on the type of land and agriculture we have around us, next to us, and then, on a larger scale in our country. So, we can't forget that we have to take care of ourselves first. Unfortunately, sounds selfish. That sounded selfish.
Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Darby. The avian influenza shortened up the egg supply in our local markets, supermarkets, big stores. And we're lucky up in Orleans County, we have a couple real prolific chicken farmers. And people to this day are still buying their eggs from them because even though they could have went to $7 a dozen, they maintained their price all the way through. And even though they are $1, and a half dozen more than the supermarket, great deal, we still support them.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're exactly right. You're familiar with the municipal regulation, the Supreme Court ruling that came
Yes.
out last spring?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so we're working on that and, it's not lost on me that a lot of development takes place on our best ag soils. Our best ag soils, because they are of proper slope and well drained and easy to work. And we're working on important protections for agriculture in Tier 1B and whatnot to protect us from having 251 rules of farming out there. Your thoughts on that?
Ugh. Yeah, I mean,
If you don't have immediate thoughts, Heather, since that's not the topic at the
Yeah.
moment on the agenda,
okay,
we can ask you to collect your thoughts and,
okay.
Great.
come back.
I think part of the challenge here, of course, is, we can protect our agricultural land. And, there's a lot that's already been developed, used for other purposes. That's, it's the way it is. It's good ag land, but it also means it's good for other things too, right? It doesn't mean it's prime ag. And so it's not good for building on. It's also good for building on, right? It's good for a septic system. It's good. So, the challenge here is we not only need land that we can farm, we need a vibrant, sustainable farming community to be able to utilize the lands that we have for agriculture. And so to say that we can't use the prime ag land for something else, but we have no one to actually farm it anymore and produce food for us, like, that's a problem. That's a different topic. But, that is reality. And then you have farms that also are really struggling and may need to sell that prime land. Maybe for retirement, maybe just to stay in business. We don't want that either. So I think there's complicated, lot to think about, but that is reality. I hear farmers say that all the time. Well, yeah, it's good ag land, but I want to retire. There's nobody here to farm this, so I'm going to sell it for development. Like, we are putting ourselves in not a great place, again, for the people of Vermont, when we don't have people here to produce food to feed us. And that's a whole nother issue, to have a vibrant agricultural economy. Well,
Heather, I had two questions just as we went through. One was actually in response to follow up to Representative Lipsky's, or maybe it was Representative O'Brien's question about land, about soil being convertible from based on good practices. I was wondering whether if, on the other hand, you had bad practices, so before we began to recognize a half century or so ago that we were depleting soils by not, using the best practices, would land that had been planted year after year with the same crop, eventually, and, is there a scenario where that land could become not primary or prime agricultural soil by the definitions?
No, still wouldn't change it. It
And
wouldn't
then-
change the federal definition for.
Yeah, okay, that's what I figured the answer was. And then on your very last slide, and you don't need to bring it up again, but just wanted to sort of understand definitions. So this was the additional farmland of local importance. And you indicated that the lands can be identified that way by the appropriate local agencies. Would that be the conservation districts?
No, it's still, it would still include NRCS, probably UVM, and the Agency of Agriculture.
Okay, so it's done not at the stream local county
No.
level. Yeah.
No. But they have been identified on a very local level to be of importance.
Representative O'Brien.
Heather, just this discussion makes me think, if we map Vermont and we look at just those sort of federally classified prime ag soils, are certain crops, do they need those prime ag soils? Like, I know you're an enthusiast of growing grains in Vermont. So it sounds like, if even if we lost, say, great prime ag soil like Williston, we can still grow great carrots through great agronomic practices in other places on non-prime ag soils. But are there certain crops where we really need those prime ag soils like wheat to grow?
Okay, yeah. So yes, I mean, some crops are going to require deeper soils like, let's just think of a carrot as an example, right? You can't grow carrot in 2 inches of topsoil. We have, places in Vermont where we only have a few inches of topsoil, and people do grow agricultural crops. And, that's why, places like Vermont, we grow great grass, right? It's a very appropriate crop for our state and our landscape. And so when we're thinking about agricultural contributions, feeding livestock and, gathering solar energy, converting that through photosynthesis into food for livestock, like Vermont's a great place to do that. Great climate, great landscape. And, some of those soils would not be good for some other crops. And primarily, I would say, because tillage is a critical component of growing some of those crops. And so on those soils, they're at too much of a risk for erosion and crop failure. I do want to go back to this question about the local importance, and I want to restate that those designations would still come. They could come at a local level. The recommendation could come from a conservation district, but I believe the final decision still has to be agreed upon by NRCS, right? So a conservation district couldn't just designate that on their own. They could recommend that it be made of local importance, but that sort of concurrence has to come from the NRCS state conservationist. Okay, so just wanted to reiterate that it can come from a district, but it would have to be, agreed upon at a higher level.
Approved, yep. While we're on that subject, do you know whether USDA has a person in place in Vermont heading NRCS?
Yes. Travis Thomason is the state conservation lead. He's the state conservationist. He's also covering New Hampshire at this time.
Okay.
Maybe that's, but he
What's his last name?
Thomason,
think I might, Tom Linson,
Thomason, Thomason.
Okay, thank you. Representative Burke.
Hi, Heather, I'm just wondering, when you had the slide about soils in Addison, Rutland County, you know, they kind of hit the top limit was 15% slope. Is it, what, is there, once you go past 15%, does that automatically trigger a different soil type? Or what, I'm wondering how the soils are classified based on slope a little bit, I guess is my question.
Yeah, so you could have an Adams loamy sand with 0, so there's kind of 0 to 3, I believe it's like 3 to 5, 5 to 8, 8 to 15, and then over that. So they're kind of ranges of slopes that are designated to the soil type. So an Adams loamy sand, you can have an Adams loamy sand on a 0 to 3% slope. You can have it on a 3 to 5%, and you could have it on a 8 to 15% as well. So, you know, somebody who's doing the soil survey went out and, you know, cored into the ground, they identified it, the characteristics, and they shot the slopes of wherever they were.
So what happens when we go over 15%?
You live in Cabot.
Yeah, there are fields that are over that, you know, they would not, it would, you know, you also got to think about driving equipment, right, up and down those slopes. So, you know, if those fields are in agricultural production, they are likely in pasture. Or possibly hay. And I'm sure if there are any farmers watching now, which they probably aren't, they're probably somebody saying, I got a slope of 18% and I've got my, you know, they're worried about their tractor, you know, sort of rolling over. But yeah, those fields are probably in grass.
The reason why I ask is a lot of municipalities in their bylaws, you're not allowed to build houses on anything over 15%.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about trying not to develop our soils of statewide significance or prime, but the only place where the houses can be built is on where those soils exist. I tried to make my case when I was on the planning commission in Cabot that was not a good rule.
Makes for a great walkout basement.
I love walkout basements.
And that's, you know, obviously there's push and pull on all sides here. Like, I think everybody understands that land that's good to grow food is good to build houses, and we need places for people to live. And so, you know, again, it's thinking about what we need now and into the future and what our state's going to look like. But at the end of the day, people have to eat. I don't care if there's 1 million people living in Vermont, they all still have to eat. And where will that food come from? Do we want it to come from here, or will we rely on everyone else? And I think we've seen we need a combination.
One more question, I think, Representative O'Brien.
Yeah, Heather, I just wondered, I mean, there's always the exception, and I'm thinking about maple, which, you know, grows great in Vermont on non-prime ag soils, on slopes, and it's a great crop. And it seems like that interesting sort of tension between climate and soils. Maple's a really interesting case.
Yeah, I would agree. There are other designations for productive forest soils, just like there are agricultural soils, and those are also designated through NRCS. And I'm not entirely sure that I believe that does include maple in those designations. So it's designated for commercial timber and then other specialized uses like maple, sugar, Christmas trees. So it does sort of, it's on the edge of kind of ag and productive forest soils is what they're called.
So Vermont's mapped also for prime
Yes.
forest soils?
Well, it's called productive forest soils.
Okay. Well,
And
Oh.
yes, that's also a federal, I believe that's also found in, Act 250, so.
Oh.
they're-
We are gonna hear, as I mentioned, from the agency more on this subject tomorrow, and I think it would be interesting either tomorrow or another time to actually look at a map. Or it doesn't have to be a map of the state, but, you know, at some level that would be useful, I guess, to look at. But what this conversation just reminds me that the entire state is mapped by the USDA with agricultural soil types, am I right? It's not just open land, but
Yep.
all the 75% of the state is forested is also classified one way or the other.
Yeah, here's one of the examples of the maps that you can access. This
That is-
is actually in Grand Isle County, so you can move around, so you can see the different soil types, click on them. To the left, you see a box. This is an Amenia silt loam, 0 to 3%. You can see what area that encompasses, right? And then you can go look at the information on the map, and you can see here, is it considered prime ag land? And it says, yes, this is prime. If it's statewide importance, it'll say state here. It tells you all kinds of different information, the high slope, the low slope, the type of water table, does it flood, you know, gives you a ton of information about the field or about the soil itself. And of course, you can zoom out and go anywhere in the state.
Derby.
Where's that? But yeah, so here's a cabin.
No man's.
13 to 15% slopes, very stony. You can see over here, it's not prime soil, state or otherwise. But I imagine that that's a hayfield somewhere in Cabot. So.
All right, we better wrap up, Heather. Thank you
Yep.
very much for this introduction.
And I'm sure whoever's coming from the agency tomorrow can get into greater detail on all the specifics, but it's an overview.
Great.
Great.
Well, I'm sure we'll have you back at some point later in the spring for
Okay.
other topics. So thank you.
All right.
Nice to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Remember,
Thank you very
much.
End of March.
We're going to take a short break.